Hello and welcome to the Women on the Wall radio show and live streaming. Uh, we are here today in Arlington, Texas, live in our studio, and we're very thankful to WBTM Radio. That stands for We Become the Media. And unfortunately, my co host, who's normally with me, Rebecca Forrest, didn't make it up tonight. We're praying for you, Rebecca, and hoping you feel better soon. But I do have an exciting guest with me today, Dr. Stuart Spitzer, who is running for Texas State Representative out of East Texas. You'll have to tell us exactly what your district looks like.
House District 4.
House District 4. All right. And you are running against incumbent Lance Gooden. And I know that there's quite a few folks in House District 4 who are ready to replace um, Mr. Gooden and are very excited about your candidacy and your opportunity to win. So, Dr. Spitzer, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're all about.
Well, who I am, I'm a physician. I'm a general surgeon. I work there in the district. I've worked in the district for about 15 years. I was actually born in Athens. The district is encompassed of portions of Henderson County, the east part of Henderson County, which includes Athens and was where I was born. My folks still live there. And mom and dad are actually the hardest campaigners I ever have, and so they're doing a great job out there for me. The rest of the district is made up of all of Kaufman County, and so it's all of Kaufman County, a portion of Henderson County. And again, I've born and raised in one part of that, lived in Henderson County for about 26 years. For the last 9 years, almost 9 years, I've lived in Kaufman County. So I feel like to represent something, you actually have to live there, work there, have my children there. And I've chosen to live there. I went to medical school, met my wife after medical school. She's a physician also. And we met and married and moved back to Athens, which is where I started my practice. So I moved back to my hometown. I tell people I was a resident there twice, once by birth and once by choice. And so we've certainly enjoyed that. My children were both born there. I have two children, Luke and Lily. Lily is in 8th grade now. She's in Crandall Schools, and my son is in 6th grade at Crandall Schools. So my wife is pretty much a full-time mom at this point. She is a doctor, a very strong woman, very good woman, and proud to say that she married me. It's one of the best things I can say about myself. And we have our children there, and does her job taking care of children and being a little bit of a soccer mom. And I do my job as a general surgeon there in the district, and several other things that I do there, but I'm sure we'll get into some of that later. But really, my focus on why I ran or why I chose to run is that really I had a kind of an epiphany one day between Henderson County and Kaufman County. It was during the time that I was transitioning from one place to another, and had always been a little bit of a political junkie. I had enjoyed learning what's going on in our society and kind of watching what things are. Listening to the radio and talk radio, and I just remember being mad at the radio. Just why in the world is it that both sides, the Democrats and the Republicans, seem to be for these bailouts? It was back when the bailouts were very popular, 2008, 2009. And they passed when the Republicans were in control and passed when the Democrats were in control. And it seemed like it was bad for one side, said it was bad when the other side was trying to pass it. But both of them were moving us in the same direction. And it was like there's nobody on the ticket that really is honest about moving us from the left to the right, or is serious about not being a big government person. And it really struck me that if I'm going to complain, then maybe I need to do something about it. But, so I'm busy, I have a wife, I have children, I have all this other stuff. But if we don't, as citizens, stand up and do something, we're always going to get what we've always gotten, and that is not working out very well for us right now.
You're exactly right, and it's interesting when you look at, and this is your second time to run for this race.
Correct.
But you were successful in that your numbers for the last time were actually, for a guy just coming in, no money to run, compared to the massive amounts of money that your opponent had, I would say it was a success story the first go around.
It was, and that was very difficult for me at first. I'm not a kind of guy who always likes to be second.
Right.
It's tough to lose. It's tough to run a hard campaign to see really my volunteers and people that worked with me that really tried to make something different for our society, to put somebody in that's not really bought and paid for by the establishment.
Right.
And I wasn't. I was outspent probably 3-1 on each vote. And so for having that much of a monetary disadvantage, it's tough. But at the same time, I'm not going to make any excuses. We didn't win. I got 47%. One of my favorite lines I tell people is I went from 0 to 47% in one race, and now I just got to get 4. I mean, that's really the
right.
difference I have to get between now and then. But it's tough. As Thomas Paine said, and famously, that tyranny like hell is not easily overcome, and so it's going to take some work to uproot the establishment and to put people in there that really aren't bought, sold, and paid for, that really want to be patriots, really want to be citizens, and not politicians. And that's another one of my favorite lines is, I'm not a politician. I've never been a politician. I'm 46 years old and have a wife, a child, and been very successful at what I've done. And I think that qualifies me to go into politics because I do believe that our citizens are smart enough to govern themselves. And that's why the Revolutionary War was fought. That's why the Alamo was fought, was so that citizens could rule themselves. And I believe that's the basis of our government. It should be the basis of our government, and I'm willing to fight for those principles.
That's great. That's great. And that's one of the beauties, I think, of this whole kind of grassroots movement, the Tea Party movement. I think there's an awakening happening, and it's building a network for candidates like yourself who are willing to put themselves out there. It's not easy to do. It is not easy to do, to put yourself out in the as a target, if you will.
Oh, it is. I mean, you get every ounce of whatever you say is scrutinized. And even coming here today, I thought, oh, what am I going to say? What will I say? Because you can take somebody's words and you can mix them out of context, and you can cut and splice and make anything say whatever you want to.
Right.
And so, I mean, if you want to parse the Bible up, you can say Judas hanged himself. Go ye therefore and do likewise. So, I mean, you can make even the best of things look bad if you take it. But I even, and I'm sad that I'm going to quote a football player here, but Robert Griffin III said when they were talking about changing the Redskins' name that he was against the politically correct part of all that, and he thought the Redskins should stay the Redskins. And he said, or sent out in a tweet, that if you speak, they will always take your words and mix them to favor them. But if you don't speak, that you're a coward. And so,
oh wow, that's good.
And so I thought, from a football player to have that much wisdom, because I think that does show quite a bit of wisdom, that if you don't speak, then you're a coward. And so, silence is truly consent, and I don't really consent for what's going on. And I think the majority of the grassroots that you mentioned, those folks are waking up, and they're starting to see that we've been lied to. We've been told that it's okay, just kind of be quiet, and we'll take care of this. And so, and we've given up some of our rights to have somebody else take care of us. And we're finding out that a government that can have enough of our stuff to take care of us can take away all those rights, and that they decide what we are, and we are no longer free people. And so, again, our nation was founded on freedom, and we should work towards that end. And if we're not, then we need to elect some new people. But those people that we elect really have to be freedom-loving individuals and folks that are willing to do it for not necessarily monetary gain, but for freedom, liberty, or for what the rights that God granted us, and not the state.
Right. Well, great. Well, let's talk about some of the issues at hand. One of there's a tour going on, if you will, talking about what happened in the last legislative session from a fiscal standpoint, and then also, and we'll get into it a little bit later, but one thing that we're passionate about with Women on the Wall is definitely education. So we'll talk about that too, but let's start out with the budget.
Well, and again, the Life, Liberty, and Property Tour, I think, is what you're referencing, which is put on by Empower Texas, Texas Eagle Forum, Texas Homeschool Coalition, Grassroots America, and Texas Right to Life. I think are the 5 that are there. They actually had something in Chandler, which is in the far east side of my district in Henderson County, earlier this week. I didn't make it. My wife did. I had a forum that I had scheduled before and was in a forum in Forney, and so I was really unable to be there. But like I told the people in Forney, I believe in a biblical definition of marriage, which means that two become one. So if my wife was there, then I was there. And
Right.
so she went and she talked to folks, and she said, that was just the most enlightening thing to sit there and listen to folks say, because what you hear and what the politicians want you to hear is a very controlled message. And I think we've seen that really in its absolute form with our White House right now, that they want to control the message and they want to be able to say what comes out and want to print it and don't really want to be in front of folks having people ask them questions that are very difficult to answer because they're no longer controlling the narrative. So we got to have people speak. And honestly, the groups that were there, they were there because they were disappointed. We had a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican governor. We should have had some very conservative, pro-liberty bills get passed, but they never got out of committee. They never got there. And that was the basic frustration that these folks and the true grassroots conservative folks were saying, and the groups were saying, is that we didn't get what we wanted. We didn't get a hearing. We got told that, listen, you got some stuff last time, don't come back again. And so there was a frustration on those on the very conservative wing of the Republican Party wanting to have things happen again with everybody campaigns as a conservative, and then they weren't getting that type of legislation out of there. An interesting fact, though, that I was saying that my wife went and I didn't go, and she ran into some people that they'd say, well, where do we look? Where do we look? Where can we find information? And that's what's so frustrating is sometimes it's hard to find good information. You look and you'll say, oh, well, I'm going to look at the NRA. The NRA, those guys are there for Second Amendments, and we've got to look at the NRA website and see whoever the NRA is for. That's who we're going to be for. And that sounds great, other than there's this thing called the friendly incumbent status. And as a challenger, I can tell you it is very, very difficult to deal with friendly incumbency. Say, well, he voted with us, or he did what we were supposed to do, so we're going to, on a single issue, promote this person and say this person is for us. And so if you just look at that web page, you'll think, oh, well, that's the guy that's for us in the conservative causes. But on a global basis, it's not the person you need to be voting for. Because there were at that meeting, there were fully 4 of those people that were very outspoken in their support for me to say, hey, Dr. Spitzer's a guy, Mr. Good, and he's been a disappointment, X, X, and Y. And they laid this out very well for the first 4 that were there. Texas Right to Life is a single issue group. And Texas Right to Life said, oh, well, Mr. Gooden voted for us. So if you go to our webpage, it says for them to vote there. So there were 4 people who said, this is a conservative person, this is the person that's for liberty, this is the person we want. And there was one that was like, well, if you go to our webpage, it'll say this. And my wife even asked them about this. Like, hey, I work in a crisis pregnancy center. This is my wife speaking. And, we're involved in the local level at trying to make sure that these young girls and even the young men know that they are children of God and that they don't have to go through these things, that they can avoid pregnancies. If there is a pregnancy, then they counsel them through the crisis. Afterwards, if they do choose to have an abortion, which unfortunately some ladies do, but they suffer for that. They suffer for that their entire lives. I mean, there are folks that are still dealing with the trauma of their abortion that they had 20 and 30 years ago. And they have abortion recovery groups where they work through those problems and let these women live their life again and know that there's no sin that's really unpardonable and there's things that they can actually forgive themselves for. So, I mean, my wife works in that, and we have worked in that as a family over years. I mean, long before I ever thought about this political thing. And so, she's a little torqued right now, frankly, at some of these folks, frankly, at the Texas Right to Life, and is penning a letter right now to say, listen, you guys really have to get on board and look at something more than just that one issue. Exactly. Because if it's for money, if it's your political action committee that's coming in and saying, hey, you've got to do this because we're going to lose money if we don't do this, then there's always going to be somebody that's going to come along that's going to have more money.
Right.
But you need to stand with the person that's willing to stand for life in all circumstances. Or you need to stand for the person who's willing to stand for gun rights. Or you need to stand for the person that's the best man there, not necessarily who the incumbent is. Because, and this isn't really what you asked me, but I'm going to go ahead and answer it. Because sometimes they will say, oh, well, you have to beat the incumbent. You have to show some reason that they shouldn't be there anymore. And I want to say that terms are terms. Your job is over at the end of your term. You must
Right.
get reelected. You must come back, and it's supposed to be a fair election. And so it's your term's over. It's a 2 year term for state house. And so my opponent's term is up. He has to
Right.
be rehired, and you can't come in and say, "Oh, well, you've got to rehire me because you've always had me." I mean, I think that's a little bit of a weak argument. And so, but term limits are your term is expired, and if you can't win the job back, then you need to go.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. And it's interesting because with Women on the Wall, we really took on the issue of the pledge card system in the House. We produced a video back after the 81st legislative session because they have this system in place where the state representatives pledge support to the Speaker of the House 2 years in advance. 2 years. And I didn't know that as a citizen. That's one of the things we are getting educated on is the system that they have put in place to keep the incumbents coming back, and we're exposing that system and questioning it. And I think that what I have learned, especially in looking at legislation, is sometimes legislation is passed for show to make it look like it's you have the illusion that a issue has been fixed when in fact it hasn't. And that kind of transitions into actually the education issue. We had C-scope that came to light because a great grandmother and daughter, the grandmother, Janine McGregor, was, I'm sorry, not Janine McGregor, Janice Van Cleve was tutoring some kids in outside of Waco area and asked to see their textbooks. And these kids said, well, we don't have textbooks. We have C-scope at our school. So she went up to the school to get the curriculum so she could tutor these kids after school. Come to find out, they told her she couldn't have access to it because she wasn't a teacher. And she called Barbara Cargill, the chairman of the State Board of Education, to say, what is this C-scope? And the chairman of the State Board of Education, it took her 6 months to have access into this curriculum. Well, that opened up a can of worms because then you had the legislature end up doing a committee hearing on it. The truth about C-scope came to light that this non-governmental organization, the ESCs, Education Service Centers, who support our public schools in each district, had formed a nonprofit organization and went around the legislature and were gaining access to our tax dollars because they were renting this curriculum product to our districts. All of that came to light. Then you have Common Core on a national level, and the same strategies and tactics of how Common Core was implemented nationally and got into 45 states across our country. It was a nonprofit organization. They said it was state-led by the Governors Association. Come to find out, the Governors Association is a nonprofit think tank out of Washington, D.C., who owns the copyright. So you start looking at the strategies and the tactics of how things are being implemented. And you made a good point earlier in that you were frustrated because it wasn't just Democrats who were voting on the stimulus package or on these huge budgets. It was Republicans as well. And when you look at Common Core, the national standards, it was, endorsed, or people were pushing it from Arne Duncan, Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton to Bill Bennett and Mike Huckabee and the Bushes. So when you look at that kind of scenario as taxpayers and moms and dads, you have to say, okay, who's making money off of this? And what we have learned now is that the Common Core standards are not just a set of national standards, it's a whole philosophy. It's a way that teachers are being trained to teach in the classroom. As Donna Gardner says, it's what she calls type 2. Everything's subjective. The teacher becomes the lead learner and is a facilitator in the classroom versus what we used to have and what is the kind of education that brought forth a nation of very educated entrepreneurs, people who were free to succeed from a traditional foundational philosophy of education where one concept builds on the next. So what we're seeing in the state of Texas is that our legislature passed legislation that said, no, we're against Common Core, the national standards. We passed HB 462, and we are against Common Core standards. Okay, well, that's great. That piece of legislation says nothing about the curriculum and the philosophy and the way that teachers are being trained. So they're going around the legislature. Our elected officials can say, oh, we're against that. But it's coming in the back door. It's all an illusion. Do you agree with that? And where do you see yourself and your family in this whole education battle?
I see that, quite frankly, as exactly as you just stated it, that people will say, "Oh, we've wiped out Common Core. It's gone. It's gone from tech schools. We voted against it, and it's gone." And that's just absurd. It's there. They call it a different name, but it's still there. C-Scope's dead. Well, C-Scope's not really dead. It's like the Hydra that Hercules was killing. You cut off one head, and another head will show up. And so it is a progressive, and they don't take no for an answer. And the progressives will find some way to subvert it, to go around it, to continue to do what they're going to do. And that's to try to get a hold of our children and teach them what they want to teach them.
Right.
And it's whoever controls the schools controls the future. And Adolf Hitler knew this. All socialist states know this, and which is why they're big on pushing big public education. I'm a big believer in public education. First off, I mean, I will get what I just said will probably be recorded and passed out to everybody and says Dr. Spitzer is against public education, which is absurd. I'm a graduate of Athens High School, which is a public school. I'm a graduate of UT Southwestern Medical School, which is a public school. My children are in public schools currently, and so my mom is a retired school teacher. My sister is a school teacher in a public school in Athens, Texas. So I am invested in our schools. I think it is our best chance for our children in the future, but we have to take control of our schools. And that may not necessarily be legislative. I'm not sure that you can write enough laws to take care of what needs to go on. This has to go on at a street level. And I really think that as the legislature, we need to pass laws that will allow more local control. And that means real local control, not local control to implement what they're told to implement. And you will have these standards, and you will meet these standards. I'm old school. I mean, I came from the days when we took tests. We took the Stanford Standard Achievement Test, which we actually, I took truth in advertising here. I homeschooled my children for 3 years, and my wife and I did. And my son for 3 years, my daughter for 2. They're back in the public school systems now and have been there. And so we kind of understand what curriculum looks like, that you have to buy a curriculum, and we had our curriculum was a book, and we taught out of the book to our children. Again, we gave them the Stanford Standard Achievement Test at the end of the year to see where they were. When I was a child in first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth grade in Athens Elementary School, we had a test, and we took the Stanford Standard Achievement Test, and our teacher looked at it and said, okay, well, Stuart is good here, and he's a terrible speller. And so that teacher knew how to work with me and where my deficits were and what I needed to do. But that was decided in the classroom level by the teacher who's there to take care of the child. I'm against pretty much anything that comes between the teacher and the child. I'm a physician. I believe in the patient doctor relationship. I think that's incredibly important, and nothing gets in the way of that. I think it's incredibly important that the teacher, who is the person who's trained to take care of my child, is able to do so. And that I'll give you a perfect example of this. I have a cousin of mine who teaches kindergarten. She's taught kindergarten for 25 plus years. And this year in her kindergarten class, she was told, "You don't have time to read to your students." She said, "Well, I've always read to my students. It calms them down. It allows them to process information that's read to them verbally. It allows them to understand cadence of exactly how you read and what that sounds like. And it's good for my children, and I've always done it, and I'm going to continue to do it." But she was told, and quite frankly, it's not going to happen. If you get caught reading to your children, that you will get disciplined. And so it seems
Wow.
that there are those that are there not for the children, but are there to push their agenda and to make sure that a lot of our teachers are great and fantastic, and will come up with curriculum, will come up with ideas on how to teach that individual child who's in their individual class, as opposed to the state mandating, "This is how you will do it, and this is what you will do, and you will teach this." And so, and I'm frankly against that. And a lot of that is being pushed by corporations who make curriculum, who want to
Right.
sell their curriculum, and they want to take the information from our children, which is another huge pet peeve of mine, that my children are in the public schools. Their information they want to have information on their race and what their mom and dad make and all these things, and they'll take that information and store it in huge computers at the Department of Education on the federal level, and then from there they'll decide what's best for my child. And I'm not really comfortable with the federal government having that much information on me. I don't really want the state government to have that much information on me. I don't want them to have it on my child, because my child is mine. And I will decide how to educate my child. I will decide how to discipline my child. I will decide how to raise my child, and I don't need the state to help me do that. I don't need the federal government to help me do that. And so those are the principles that I want to propose. Those are the principles I want to live by, and I think that's how education will be best. And again, math hasn't changed over the last, I don't know how many thousands of years.
Right.
And so our teaching of it, when they say it's progressive and it's the new way to do it, if it hasn't been proven,
Right.
the old stuff's been proven time and time and time again. The new things that are out, they're not really proven. And again, my children are not guinea pigs.
Right.
And I want to make sure that my children are taught the way that it is best for them to be taught. If there's some experiment, then that needs to be done on an experimental basis and not on my child, and not pushed as that this is the way it will be and this is what we're thinking now because this is new and the latest and greatest and this is what somebody said, because I don't know who somebody is. I'm very, very, very particular about what I do with my patients. I want to know who it is that's recommending what.
Right.
And what those studies are, and I want to look at them and I want to go through those and find out. And I think we need to ask more questions as parents. We need to be up finding out what's going on. And my wife's been on one of the curriculum committees at the local schools, and she's trying to find out exactly what's going on behind the scenes and to look, because we want to be involved parents. We want to support the public schools as much as we can, but we know that it's critical that they teach what is important to us, and
Right.
that is the student, that's the parent, and that we're the ones that really are there to make the decision as to whether what they're teaching our children is appropriate or not. It's not. It's certainly not a state function. I don't think it's a national function, and I don't think that I am the person who needs to decide what the education needs to be for your child or anybody else's child. But I do feel very strongly that for my child and for our community, that we need to show up at our schools and know exactly what they're teaching our children, and to be able to give our opinion, and that our opinions matter as citizens. They always have, and they always should.
Well, and it's interesting because when you look at C-Scope and how it was implemented, it was put into 875 small and rural communities across the state, and no one even really knew about it. And I think it's very interesting when you look at, like I said, the strategies and the tactics. If we, and I believe that there are some people that would like to collapse our public school system. The beauty of our public school system is that it is run by a locally elected school board. The private schools, charter schools, all those organizations, education institutions, are run by appointed boards, and those appointed boards are beholden to whoever's giving the grant money. And when you look at, especially like a state like Texas, where you have these small and rural communities, where the heart and soul of the community, and many times the largest employer of the community, is the local public school. And I don't know about you in Athens, Texas, but I know in Argyle, Texas, we just won state in football. The whole community came together around that team, and it involved the whole community. Um, if you're black, white, purple, yellow, I don't care what it is, you're all coming together to win. And there's something wonderful about that. And that type of community involvement is different than what we see happening through this transformation of education in the state of Texas, where you have 35 basically superintendents from across the state came together and decided how to fundamentally transform our education system, and no one even knew it was happening. And now you have HB 5 that just passed, which many of us believe, and the more and more I look into this and see what the ramifications of HB 5 are, basically it sets up 5 different pathways to graduation for these kids, which sounds great. It always sounds great, because if you're a kid that's more technology inclined, you're going to go down this pathway. If you're vocationally inclined, you're going to go down that pathway. The problem with it is those decisions are made by the end of 8th grade, and they're based on assessments and scores. What if you're a late bloomer? What if you didn't get the you didn't learn your multiplications in one school, and you haven't learned the basics, and so now you're catching up? What we're saying is we're putting these kids on a pathway before they're old enough to decide what their college and career should be. And it's a European way. It's a European way of education. And that is the Common Core philosophy. It's all about college and career ready. And now we see this company, it's called Engage to Learn, is now out, and they're having community meetings, and they're discussing HB 5, and the terminology and what they're saying is, oh, we need to flip the classroom, and the teacher is the lead learner, and they will help the students to design their own education. That's not traditional, foundational, and teaching kids the basics first. We're getting them ready for a career before they're developmentally ready to do that.
Yeah. But as far as Athens, they had a really good football season this year. They did really well. So did my kids. Were actually in Crandall. Crandall won a playoff game also. So
all right,
and Kaufman did pretty well too. So,
yes.
But I understand exactly what you're saying about the schools that people rally around their schools,
right?
And they're proud of their schools and those type things. And you know, I am too. I mean, my children are there. It's my wife tonight will be at a ball game. I'm going to be unfortunately at another forum to speak,
right,
but I love coaching my kids and doing those kind of things. I mean, and the schools are where we need to focus, but it has to be a good focus. I mean, we have to know what's going on there. And again, when I went to school, it was the rich, the poor, the black, the white. Everybody went to school together, and it was one school, and it worked well. And today, there is an explosion of homeschool. There is an explosion of private school. There's an explosion of other types of schools. The reason for those explosions is that our schools aren't preparing the children as they once did, and people are recognizing that, and people are leaving. People are voting with their feet. And
right.
so, and they'll continue to do that. And I think people should have the right to vote with their feet. I don't think there should
right.
be obligatory. Again, my children are my own. If the school's not providing the education that they need, then we need to change that, and we have to put our children someplace else. So, and that to me is a shame. It really is. When I go back and look at my old high school and how things have changed, I think, it's still good and you can still get a good education here, but why are so many people gone? And some of the communities, like you mentioned, schools are huge employers, and a lot of the movers and shakers of the communities are taking their children someplace else and going to school. And so, which means that mom or whoever's taking them there is staying someplace else and spending their money, and the local towns are losing some of their revenue, some of their tax base, some of their, and frankly, if the Stuart and Sherry Spitzers are taking our children out of schools, because Sherry Spitzer is there in our local schools, helping the teacher, working with the children, doing educational programs, again, through Stillwaters, which is a crisis center that she's working with. And so you lose those families, those schools are going to hurt because of that. And so I think it's important that we continue to try to make our schools the best so that those families will stay there and so that it will be best for everyone. But again, I do think it's a choice that has to be made by those individual schools. And that didn't address your question. You'd asked me something. I can't quite remember what it is right now.
Well, I just kind of, this is such an important issue. And it's interesting because your opponent, Lance Gooden, he's not at the same place that to make educated decisions on education because he doesn't have children. He's a single man, and not that should preclude someone from being in office, but when these are major issues in our society, I think it is something notable.
And I think there's something to be said for experience. Again, my wife is a physician. And it's funny because before we had children, she's a family physician. She'd take care of people who had children. And she goes, I'm so much better at taking care of families with children now because I get it. I understand what's going on. I have my own children. I see the problems that they're having. I've had some of the same problems as my children. And so as a parent who has children in the school system, I understand what goes on. Again, we did some homeschool for a while, and we understand that it's tough teaching children sometimes. And so, we have a greater appreciation for curriculum, greater appreciation for the teachers, a greater appreciation for a lot of those things because we see it, we've lived through it, I understand what's going on. Again, my mom was a educator growing up, and so my sister's still kind of in the system, and so yeah, I do. I see it from both sides, from as a child growing up, from what my parent went through, from what my children are going through, what my sister's going through. We get it, and so. I think that is incredibly important to actually have. We got a stake in the game.
That's right.
My children are there, and they're precious to me, and they're precious to my wife, and we want to make for sure that that's what's going on, which is the best. And again, I've been. My wife was out talking. She just called me an hour ago, and said, "Yeah, I went to somebody's house, and they said they were going to vote against you because you weren't for this." Well, it was about the teacher pension thing. And whether you're for defined benefits or for defined payments, or I can't exactly remember the exact terminology that was being used, but it was defined benefit versus defined contribution is what it is. And so I'm not necessarily against anything with a defined benefit, not divine, but it's people should be free to do what they want to with their money. And so I really feel strongly that my mother, who is a teacher, and there is somewhere between I forget it's 120 to 160 billion dollars, which is in the teacher retirement fund, and that's money that she's put in there.
Right.
And so she should have access to whatever her money is that's in there. And I think that's a liberty issue. And if people want to say, "Oh, well, we want to stay with what we have," stay with what you have. But it's not the best. My mom still gets some stuff from Social Security every now and then to say, we're not sure that you're getting the full pension that you should get. I mean, it's bad when the Social Security's calling you and saying, I'm not sure you're getting what you need to get. And so it's a system that's there, and most of the time it's just fear tactics. And that's what the left does is say, oh, no, you can't do that. If you do that, then so-and-so's going to starve. They're not going to have money. You're much better off letting us manage your money than you are managing it yourself. And so it's just an extension of the nanny state, and it's always has fear as its basis, that you're not smart enough to do it, you can't do it, you let us do it, we'll take care of you, and kind of pat you on your head and move you along. And again, my mom's an educator, and she gets this, and she's like, I am smart enough to handle my own money.
Right.
I don't necessarily need somebody else to do that. And if you want to keep your money in the system, keep your money in the system. But those people that want to take their money out, who are liberty-minded, feel that it is their money that's in there and it's not the state's money, and don't want to have to come back to the state. And again, I don't want to control somebody else's money. I really
Right.
don't. I'm a
Right.
freedom kind of guy. I want somebody to be able to control their own money. To, if they want to get in a co-op with somebody else and hire somebody to manage their money, hey, that's fine.
Right.
But it's their money, and I think when the state says we have taken your money and we'll give it back to you as we see fit, that there's a
Oh.
real problem there. And so it's not best for them, and it's not. I'm a little lady who has been a teacher, and I'm not smart enough to take care of things, and I'm not going to take the time to do it. I mean, she would rather do it herself. And so,
Right.
and she should have the liberty to do it herself without having to come back to the because if the legislators can decide how much they're going to give them, they can decide later how much to take away from them. And I want
Exactly.
people to be able to say, hey, that's it's their retirement. It's not my retirement, and I don't really want control over it.
Right.
I would rather them have control over it because to me it's a liberty issue. It's a freedom issue. The government. If we want the government to take care of us, then we're going to have to give up more of our liberty than I'm comfortable giving up.
Well, and it's interesting because when you look at the huge amounts of money that are in the education bureaucracy, that what we see happening, a lot of these superintendents across the state, they're retiring with full benefits, and then they go and get another job at another district, or they become consultants, and they get into there's a lot of money to be made in education. Not That's not the money that's going to the teachers, because it's going to curriculum products like C-Scope. It's going to all these things that supposedly fix our kids, when the very people who know how to educate our kids are the teachers. The money's not getting to them.
It does not get to the classroom. I agree with you on that. And I've talked to some teachers 2 days ago, and that's exactly what they said. I mean, I asked them specifically about their superintendent in their school, who I know, and they said, yeah, so he was pretty good about taking money out of the classroom. He was really good at smiling at you and patting you on the back, but the money went out of the classroom.
Right.
And it went to curriculum coordinators, it went to whatever else, but it didn't go. And I mentioned this earlier, that I really feel that the place where learning goes is in the classroom with a teacher and a child, and that teacher being able to decide what goes on with that child. And so, interestingly, 30 years ago, there were three teachers for every one non-teacher. And today that ratio is 1-to-1. So the more money we pour into education, it hasn't gone into either paying our teachers more, increasing their retirement, or doing anything specifically for the teachers who are in the classroom. We've built a lot of bureaucracy,
Right.
and that bureaucracy does not teach our children. And so, and again, I mean, that goes over into other areas of my political leanings, is that we need to get rid of bureaucracy, that money gets spent on what it's supposed to be spent on, and our educational dollar is supposed to be spent on educating our children,
Right.
and not on building buildings or building bureaucracy or building barriers that actually hinder our children from learning from their teacher.
Right. Great. Another big issue in the state of Texas that we're all trying to figure out, and I know on a national level it's the big hot topic, and that's immigration.
We really haven't done much in the state of Texas on immigration.
Right.
We still have sanctuary cities. Sanctuary cities bills have died. We still have in-state tuition for illegal aliens, which, if they're not legal to be here, then I'm not sure how they can give them in-state tuition. So it it doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense. And those topics come up, but they get put away, and they get put away very quickly. And so bilingual education, again, we talk about things that have been proven and things that have not been proven. Bilingual education has never been proven to be better.
Right.
And so we spend billions of dollars on bilingual education when it hasn't been proven to be better. I mean, I give the example of my grandfather. My grandfather is German. He was born here. I think his father was even born here, but they lived in little German communities, and he spoke German whenever he went to first grade. But his first grade textbook wasn't in German. He's never voted on a German ballot. And so they assimilated into the American culture, learned English, and his children and grandchildren have done very well because of that. And so those are just common sense issues, and we don't
Right.
do those on a state level. I mean, we can talk about whether we're going to, enforce our border or do this or that. But I mean, there's some simple, easy, common sense things that will actually save us money in the
Right.
long run, and we have not done those. So, and that's just from lack of leadership. And so we've got to do something to address the problems and address the incentives of people coming here before we start talking about throwing people out. And so
Right.
that's my personal philosophy on that. It just nothing has been done over the last 4 years for sure about that.
Right. Right. Well, what are some things that we've got education covered, we've got immigration, the budget. What are some things that you see um, besides those issues that you're passionate about? Is there anything else that you want our listeners to know about you um, that really drives you?
There is, there's your basic, we've got to do more to, and I talked about protecting the liberty of bunch today.
Right.
And so some of that is making sure that we have the right to defend ourselves. I'm
Uh-huh.
a big proponent of the Second Amendment. I'm A-rated by the Texas State Rifle Association and the NRA, but I won't be endorsed by them because you have to be an incumbent to get the friendly incumbent before you can get an A+ rating, although I'm A-rated. So it's one of those issues that, again, things have gotten introduced, but nothing has happened.
Right.
And so you still can't carry. I mean, I was going from my house and out of my car, and I was going to the school 3 days ago. I'm a mentor to a child in school. I've been doing that for about 7 years or so, and it's in a public school there in Kaufman. Again, my kids go to Crandall, but I've been there involved with the program just through my church, and I got out and was going to put my keys in my pocket, and I realized I've got a gun there. I've got to take my gun out of my pocket and put it back there because I can't take it into that school because it has to stay in the car, and that's the state law. And so I can't defend myself when I'm there, even though I am a citizen and I should be able to defend myself and defend those children. There shouldn't be gun-free zones because that's where bad things happen to people. When you announce that we don't allow people here to defend themselves. And so, but bills like that have been introduced, but they haven't gone through. And
Right.
so we need to have some leadership. We need to have some people that are willing to push those things. I'm passionate about life issues. We talked earlier about my wife and our thoughts on that. I mean, I've actually been there as a physician. I've delivered babies. I've delivered some that were alive and some that were demised. And it's a heart issue with me. It's not one of those things that you can. I'm never going to change on that. And so even if the winds change on that, I'm not changing on that. And so that's I'm quite passionate about that. We did talk about the education. I'm passionate about defending my children. There are laws, and there's actually a law that did not get passed last session because I don't think that our state representative really fought for it like he fought for other laws that were for his donors or for others that thought were going to be important. But my children are important. And so there's actually a law that does not allow the city, if it's a home rule city, which is less than 5,000 people, to prohibit sex offenders from living within 1,000 feet of the schools. You can do it if you're in Arlington. You can do it if you're in a bigger city. But if it's less than 5,000 population city, they can't do it. And so my child goes to one of those schools. And so and that bothers me. There was another friend of ours whose child was molested, for lack of a better word, in a public place. And the molester's still out. He's still free because there wasn't a statute there, and the DA, and this was not in my home county, but it was in a neighboring county, and but they lacked the statutory ability to prosecute that. And I'm like, well, that's the kind of thing that I can help, that I can show up and find out, okay, what do we need to have to be able to put these guys who are clearly targeting young boys in jail? And so, and that guy's still running around the street because we lacked laws to do that. And so there are things. I got a call on the way up here from somebody who was concerned about banking and about them foreclosing on people's houses and the laws that are there to make it where it's easier for banks to do that, that they lose their judicial review so that the county can't look at it and say, well, this guy paid his money, but that the banks have all the power. Those are the kind of things that, and he said, I've contacted my national rep and I've contacted my state rep, and he's not going to work with me on this bill, and I hope you will. I'm like, that's the kind of thing I want to do. So I don't necessarily have an agenda that I'm going to
Right.
say, hey, listen, I'm going to go in there, I'm going to do this, 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 and this. So those are going to be the three things I'm going to do. As a representative, you represent your people.
Right.
And so, and like I said, people are calling me right now and saying, hey, listen, we're not getting represented. If you're going to be there, is this kind of the thing that you're going to take up because it hadn't been taken up?
Right.
Are you going to stand with us on this? And so, and I think those are the kind of issues that I want to bring forward. I'm not there for it's not called the Stuart Spitzer job. It's called a representative. And that means that the things that are going on in the district, when somebody comes to me and says, hey, I want to pass this law, but I can't because I lack the statutory ability to do it. Or, hey, I want to prosecute this crime, but I lack the statutory ability to do it. Or, hey, this is what's going on, and it's robbing money from our county, and it's allowing people to lose their houses, but it's benefiting big banks. That's the kind of thing I want to fight because those are things that are important to the people of the district. I'm a physician. I make a good salary. And so I don't necessarily need the publicity. I don't need the money. I don't really want the money. And so I think I am the establishment's worst nightmare.
Right.
I'm not paid for by them. They don't own me.
Right.
I am not for sale. And so, I'll tell you just a quick story. My child the other day, Luke, who's 12, he just turned 12. His birthday was a few days ago, and he had a little bit of cash on him because Grammy had given him some money, and Grandpa John had given him some money, and he had some from his friends, and he had a party, and we had a bunch of kids at our house. And he was kind of counting things up, and he was going through it, and I was at the computer, and he just walked over and handed me some money. He gave me a $20 bill and said, hey, Dad, this is for your campaign. And
Oh, wow.
so my son has seen how hard Daddy's been at work
Right.
to change things.
Right.
My son knows that Daddy doesn't need any more hassles. That Daddy'd rather be outside playing baseball with him, and I still try to make time to do that kind of thing. But
Right.
but it's important to me to represent everybody. My son is going to grow up in this world. And he's growing up in a world right now that's controlled by people who hand out money for favors. And so, and my son knows that Daddy's not for sale.
Right.
And he knows that I'm going to take that money and I'm going to use it to help me so that Daddy can go down to Austin and take the for sale sign off of the front of our state capitol. And so,
That's great. That is great. You know, that's what we need. We have had, and by the way, just for disclaimer, Women on the Wall does not endorse, but both Rebecca Forrest and I have the ability as individuals to endorse, and we've had some great people on this show. We've had Barry Smitherman, we've had Frank Kuchar. Frank Kuchar's one of those guys like you who stood up. He's got grandchildren. He's fighting for the next generation. He's fighting for them, and that's, in my opinion, what we need are elected officials. I said this to Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst. I said, I could really care less about your political career. I care about people who govern as dads, ticked off dads. When you see what's happening in this bureaucracy, when you see what's happening in Austin with elected officials, we can't have that anymore. We have got to have people in office who are willing to fight for their children and grandchildren.